What if I told you that one of the most iconic battles in history wasn't won by strength, experience, or brute force, but by faith? That a teenage shepherd with no armor and no military training stood face to face with a towering, seasoned warrior and won, not with a sword, not with an army, but with a stone and a belief that God was on his side. This is the story of David and Goliath, a story of courage when everyone else was afraid, a story of faith when others only saw fear, a story of an ordinary boy who did something extraordinary because he trusted in something bigger than himself. Settle in as we walk through this powerful and timeless narrative. Whether you've heard it 100 times or this is your first, you're about to experience it in a fresh, engaging way that goes deeper than just a fight. It goes straight to the heart of what it means to believe. The valley of Elah was quiet. Two massive armies faced each other from opposite hills. On one side stood the army of Israel, led by King Saul. On the other, the Philistines, Israel's most persistent and dangerous enemy. Between them stretched a valley, dry and dusty, the stage for what would become a historic confrontation. For days, they stood locked in a standoff. Neither side advanced. Neither side retreated. The tension was thick. Every morning, the soldiers of Israel would rise early, strap on their armor, and take their positions along the hilltop. And every evening, they returned to camp battle-ready, but battle-less. Then, one morning, something shifted. A sound rose from the Philistine camp. Heavy footsteps, clinking armor, and then a massive figure stepped forward from their ranks. His name was Goliath of Gath. He wasn't just any soldier. He was a champion, the Philistine warrior, a giant of a man standing over 9 feet tall. His bronze helmet glinted in the sun. A coat of heavy scale armor hung from his shoulders, weighing nearly 125 pounds. His legs were protected by bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung across his back. The shaft of his spear was as thick as a weaver's rod, and its iron point alone weighed over 15 pounds. He was terrifying. Goliath stood at the edge of the valley and roared up at the Israelites. "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." The challenge rang through the valley like thunder. Then he added something worse. "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." Not a sound came from the Israelite side. Soldiers looked at each other nervously. Some gripped their swords tighter. Others looked away. No one stepped forward. Day after day, Goliath returned. Morning and evening for 40 days, he issued the same challenge. And every time the army of Israel shrank back in fear. Even King Saul, once a mighty warrior himself, stayed in his tent. No one dared to fight the giant. It seemed like the Israelites had already lost, not because they were defeated, but because they were too afraid to even try. But in the background, away from the battlefield, someone else was living a very different kind of life. A young boy named David, far from the noise of war, was tending sheep in the hills of Bethlehem, unaware that soon he'd walk into that valley, and history would never be the same. While fear ruled the battlefield, in the quiet hills of Bethlehem, life was simple, steady, and peaceful. David, the youngest son of Jesse, spent his days watching over sheep. The rolling pastures were his workplace, and the stars his ceiling. As he guided his flock, he often played the harp, writing songs to God, songs that would one day become part of the Psalms. David wasn't a soldier. He didn't wear armor. He wasn't trained for war, but he was brave, and he knew how to protect what was his. When lions or bears came for his sheep, David didn't run. He chased them, fought them off, killed them when he had to. More importantly, David loved God deeply, passionately. His faith wasn't just something he talked about, it was something he lived, even in the smallest corners of his life. Back in Bethlehem, David's father, Jesse, was keeping close tabs on the war. 3 of his older sons, Eliab, Abinadab, and Shammah, were in Saul's army, stationed near the valley of Elah. One day, Jesse called for David. He handed him a bundle of roasted grain, bread, and cheese. "Take these to your brothers," he said. "See how they're doing. Bring back word." David rose early the next morning. He left his sheep in the care of another shepherd and set off. The road from Bethlehem to the battlefield was long, dusty, and tense. As David walked, he could hear distant rumblings, armor clanking, men shouting the distant echo of Goliath's taunts. When he arrived at the camp, he ran to the front lines. His eyes were wide with curiosity. This was his first time near an army. The rows of tents, the sounds of sharpening swords, the smell of sweat, dust, and fear. He greeted his brothers, handed over the supplies, and began to ask questions. "What's going on? Why is no one fighting?" Before they could answer, Goliath stepped forward again. David heard the giant's voice. He saw the fear wash over the soldiers. He watched them scatter, just as they had the past 40 days. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? David asked, shocked. His oldest brother, Eliab, was furious. "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and how wicked your heart is. You just came to watch the battle." David didn't fight back. He simply said, "What have I done now? Can't I even speak?" But David kept asking questions. Word began to spread there was a young boy in the camp who wasn't afraid, who actually wanted to fight the giant. And when word reached King Saul, everything changed. The boy who had only come to bring bread was about to be brought before the king. David was led through the camp, past ranks of soldiers, past tents where commanders were huddled over maps, past fires where men sharpened spears and muttered in disbelief. This boy, this shepherd, wanted to face Goliath? The guards brought him to King Saul's tent. Inside, Saul sat heavily on his throne-like chair, looking older than his years. His face was worn, lined with fear and exhaustion. When he saw David, he raised an eyebrow. "You're the one?" Saul asked. "You've been asking about the giant?" David nodded. "Yes, my lord. Let no one lose heart on account of him. I, your servant, will go and fight this Philistine." Saul couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You are not able to go against this Philistine and fight him," Saul said slowly. "You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David stood firm. His voice didn't shake. His eyes didn't flinch. "I have been keeping my father's sheep," he said. "When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it." He paused, letting that sink in. "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." There was silence. Saul stared at him for a long moment. In the eyes of this boy, he saw something missing from the rest of the army, something he had once had himself: faith, courage, an unshakable belief in God. "Go," Saul finally said, nodding. "And the Lord be with you." Saul called for his armor. A bronze helmet was placed on David's head, a heavy coat of armor strapped to his chest. A sword hung at his side. David could barely move. He took a few awkward steps, then stopped. "I cannot go in these," he said, shaking his head. "I am not used to them." He took off the armor and set the sword down gently. Then quietly, David walked to a nearby stream. The water trickled softly between the rocks. He knelt and chose 5 smooth stones, placing them carefully into the pouch on his shepherd's bag. With his sling in hand and his heart full of trust in God, David turned toward the battlefield. The boy was ready. The giant had no idea what was coming. The sun hung high over the valley of Elah. On one hillside, the army of Israel stood, squinting into the glare, silent with anxiety. On the opposite slope, the Philistine warriors looked on, whispering and laughing among themselves. And then a figure emerged, small, alone, no shield, no sword. Just a boy stepping into the valley with a shepherd's pouch and a sling. David. The giant marched forward, towering above every man. His armor gleamed, his steps pounded like thunder. His shield-bearer walked before him, but the real force was Goliath himself. When Goliath saw David, he stopped. He tilted his head, puzzled. Then he laughed. "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" He thundered. "Come here and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David didn't flinch. He took a breath and shouted back, his voice ringing, clear and bold. "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." The soldiers behind David stood stunned. David pointed toward Goliath. "This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands. I'll strike you down and cut off your head. The whole world will know there is a God in Israel, and everyone here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." A silence fell. Then Goliath roared and rushed forward, and David ran too straight toward the giant. He reached into his pouch, pulled out a stone, placed it in his sling. He spun it, once, twice, 3 times, then he let go. The stone flew through the air with deadly speed. It struck Goliath right between the eyes. The giant stumbled, staggered, and crashed to the ground. Silence. The Philistines froze in horror. The Israelites stood stunned. David didn't stop. He ran forward, stood over Goliath, took the giant's own sword, and cut off his head. He lifted it high. The Philistines turned and ran in terror. The Israelite army surged forward with a shout, chasing them down the valley. But it wasn't the sword that had won the battle. It was faith, the boy who believed that God was bigger than any giant. David, the shepherd. David, the warrior. David, the man after God's own heart. As the Philistines fled in terror, the Israelite soldiers surged forward. Shouts filled the valley, echoing from the hills, as the army of Israel chased the enemy all the way to the gates of Ekron. It was a victory no one expected. When the battle was over, the Israelite soldiers returned to plunder the abandoned Philistine camp. Tents filled with supplies, weapons, and treasures were left behind in the chaos. But David didn't run after spoils. He still stood near Goliath's body, the massive sword in his hand. His heart pounded in his chest, not from fear, but from the weight of what had just happened. He picked up Goliath's head and returned to the Israelite camp. The soldiers stepped aside for him, their eyes wide, some stunned, others in awe. No one looked at David the same way again. He was no longer just a shepherd. When he arrived before King Saul, David still held the giant's head in his hands. Saul stood to his feet, gazing at the young boy. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul asked. David answered, "I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem." And with that, a new chapter in Israel's history began. David's name quickly spread across the land. Songs were sung about him. People praised him. Even the women danced and sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." But with praise came problems. Jealousy began to grow in King Saul's heart. The man who had once welcomed David as a hero now began to see him as a threat. Still, David remained humble. He didn't boast about his victory. He continued to serve Saul, playing music to calm the king's troubled spirit. He continued to trust in God. The battle with Goliath was over, but the journey of David was only beginning. This victory had revealed more than David's courage. It revealed his calling. The boy who stood against a giant would one day stand before a nation as its king. But for now, he was still just a servant with a sling, a song, and a heart full of faith.